Hey everybody, welcome back to Dungeon Brew, and today we are going to be talking about side quests. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everybody, today we are going to be continuing our questing series where we are going to be talking about side quests. We've already covered a couple of videos on close-ended quests and open-ended quests. You can check those out in the playlist if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. But for now, we're going to be talking about side quests. And to remind everybody who might be tuning in for the first time, when we're talking about quests, we're talking about a task or an objective that the DM has presented to the party that has that he's wanting to them or they're wanting them to accomplish. All right, muddled through that, but you guys get the idea. For side quests, we're specifically talking about quests that don't have anything to do with the campaign. They don't revolve around the campaign. They're primarily generated off to the side to give the party something else to do, to satisfy party interests, that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sometimes side quests, the importance of them are lost on the DM or even on the players. They will sidestep a lot of them because they don't find interest in them. But side quests can also oftentimes serve as a means to help the party gain more experience, to prepare them for that next plot point in the campaign, to give them the right gear or equipment to really be able to overcome some of those objectives that they're going to have to face down the road. And it's also a great opportunity for character development, which I know I'm personally have a stake in because I love watching characters actually grow and change throughout the course of the story. But some of my characters' greatest challenges have come from what they've experienced in side quests, and it's really changed their entire perspective in how they play the game or approach a campaign overall.
Yeah, and I think that the equipment thing is also a really good call out. I have a tendency in a lot of the games that I run for specific players to be very interested in getting specific gear for their characters. Side quests are a great way to handle those requests by basically saying, "Listen, you can go research this, and then you can find rumors about the location of this magical item or the location of an enchanter who might be willing to craft this for you, that type of thing." And it can generate side quests. It can generate material. It can generate opportunities for the group or for individual characters within the group to explore the world in a way that allows them access to equipment that they don't necessarily get as part of the main quest line. And I honestly think that it's an excellent opportunity to try and include some of those requests that you do have to handle from time to time from those players or the players who are very interested in having a more powerful or more specific type of equipment for the build that they're envisioning for their character.
Now I'm just smiling slightly because I know that I have a tendency to give characters too powerful of shit on those side quests, and then I have to go back and adjust things throughout my overall campaign so it's well balanced. Because if they do too many side quests before they move on through the core campaign that I may have pre-built, then they are just stronger than my monsters and challenges that I presented for them.
Yeah, you do definitely have to be careful when you're doing side quests to try and measure. Um, and this isn't only for equipment; it's for experience. Don't mistake, especially. I'm thinking like fifth edition. There's a big difference between the different tiers of play when you're going from first tier to second tier, which is specifically like going from fourth to fifth level, going from like 10th to 11th level. Fighter classes get more attacks; they get more powerful. If you're talking about fourth to fifth level, a lot of your casters get access to third level spells. I'm calling out these specifically, and for fifth edition, it's a very obvious transition. But what occurs is that if you are including too many padding quests, too many side quests that offer too much experience, you're going to get characters to a higher level that are going to make them more powerful. Now, it's useful if you want them to be at that next tier of play for the main campaign. It's debilitating if you don't and you accidentally provide a little bit too much experience, and suddenly fireballs are going to be in play where you didn't think they were going to be, and you still have kobolds on the field. So do keep in mind, if you are adding in additional quests, that you are measuring the amount of experience, the type of equipment, all of those things that you're giving out to the group to make sure that you're prepared for it overall.
Yep, I want to make a kobold kebab joke, but I will refrain. I will say that I know for myself as a DM, side quests are kind of my bread and butter. I really like developing them. For one, it feeds me as a DM in terms of like creating different storylines, and I'm all about the story. So it allows me to play with different elements of storytelling or introduce new monsters or new lore or new things about a region that just really allow me to be creative. So it's a lot of fun, and it kind of allows me to gauge where my characters interests lie. It allows me to see what's going to be exciting for them so I can continue building in that way. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but I use side quests a lot as a hook. It is kind of oftentimes a one and done. It's got a completed end. It's a closed quest in many ways, but it can easily turn into an open-ended quest if my characters show interest. I'm like, hey, they really liked the story behind this mage, or this the history behind this staff that they retrieved, or the lore in this region and this legend that led to the development of this dungeon. And so then I'm like, I'm going to go build out more about this because they're showing interest in it.
Yeah, and I definitely do the same thing. That's it is excellent testing waters to determine what is interesting to the party. And we have, in our previous videos, we've talked a lot about how we try and hook players and get them involved and interested in some of the quests we do. Side quests are often the avenue for that. And that's usually what I fill up the first couple of levels of gameplay with, are a bunch of side quests, because that gives me a very good idea of what's going on with the party and their interests. In addition to that, I do have a tendency to like to try and provide resources to my party. In the sense that, do they have an enchanter that they can call on as an ally? Do they have some warriors who assist them in training or are willing to lead their armies when they get into later levels, that type of thing? So side quests are also an opportunity for me to introduce NPCs that are influential in the region, that then exist after the quest is completed as a type of resource for the party, for them to be able to utilize in a meaningful way. So also think about it in those ways, that a side quest can be an opportunity for them to basically do a favor for somebody, and then they owe them one later on. And that can be really fun, especially when you get into like really late campaign and they're trying to call on their allies, call on their friends in order to try and accomplish, a world shattering or a world defining type event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just thinking of my Hawkers campaign I'm currently running over on our Twitch channel and here on YouTube. And that is a lot of what my side quests are, building those allies and those connections with other NPCs, because it's such a social campaign, so it really serves well there. But you don't just want to do this in heavily social campaigns. Mm-hmm. It works in a lot of different types.
So I do want to ask you, Joshua, in terms of side quests, what do you do when it comes to length, or how voluminous you try and make those side quests? Do you tend to make them very short, one and done, narrow? I'm talking like an hour or two of gameplay, or is this something that will last more than one session?
Honestly, I like to fit a side quest within the cusp of whatever your gameplay session is. So I honestly would tell DMs to structure them based on whatever your session looks like, so it does fit within that time frame. If you're only playing an hour a week, which I'm sorry if that's all the longer you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but if you're only playing an hour a week, you're probably going to want your quest to be probably about half or even a third of that gameplay, so that you have time to do other things within that gaming session. If I'm doing a 2-hour gameplay session, it's usually going to be somewhere, again, around about a third of that to a half of that time period is going to be spent on that side quest. If it's 4 hours, it may be a couple of hours that they're actually spending and doing that. But I like to have them be about a third to a half of the gameplay session when I structure them, so that not only can you move into it, process it, but you can then move back out of it and then process what occurred as well among the characters to allow it to have some sort of developmental feel. I don't want it to be a thing that lasts the entire session, so that you kind of step in, you deal with it, you step out, and by the time we come back again, there's been no time to like embody what has occurred or what's happened, or allow me as a DM to assess how the characters responded to the quest that I gave them.
See, that's very interesting, because for myself, when it comes to side quests, they tend to last more than one session, honestly. It kind of depends. I mean, I've had shorter side quests where something gets done a little bit more quickly, especially as it occurs within a dungeon. So there are opportunities where there is the main quest that exists within the dungeon that needs to be accomplished. There are side quests. Those side quests can be very short. There are other times where the example that I was providing before, where somebody wants a specific piece of equipment or something, and it's like, oh, well, you have to go find it. That may be a multi-session event. So it may just be, not necessarily full sessions. So it may be, this session you have to go talk to this person. The next session you go talk to this person. You kind of fill in the dots until you eventually find the location. And you want this magical belt of giant strength. Well, you have to adventure to this dungeon to go retrieve it. And the dungeon itself may last a session or two, depending on, how excited I am about building it. But in those instances, my side quests can then be something that's rather involved and not necessarily something that occurs or completes very quickly.
Yeah, I wonder if I am speaking too hastily on how I handled it, because it is true that I've done that as well. I'm thinking about things like rescuing the Jarl's children at Reglamere that we talked about in our last video, or even returning the bones to Hal. Some of those things have definitely been multi-sessional and how they've occurred or what's happened. And dungeons themselves are their own beast, and we'll talk about those later in the series too. And those can definitely last multiple sessions. But I do want to make sure that there are clear chapters or cut points out of that, so there's time for you to process and to assess. And I think that that's what's important. So yeah, I have definitely had side quests that are multifaceted that last several sessions, but there's very clear endpoints for the characters to rest, have a campfire, step away from the battle or from the pursuit of whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, to kind of see where they're sitting in the process of what they're going through.
That definitely makes sense.
Yeah. Yours does too. I was like, yeah, now that you say that, I've definitely had quests that are side quests that we spent a month or two going through that and didn't accomplish it, but there was very clear stopping points, and I didn't have it last the entire session of them just hacking and slashing and moving forward.
So yeah, there are a variety of ways to approach it. I think that there probably isn't any one way to do everything absolutely correctly. So take your own interpretation of how you approach it. But I think the main thing to take away from it is that it should be, like you said, it should be kind of self-enclosed, something that has clear beginning and end points. It should be something that is usually derived from player interest, because for main campaign, I mean, you want the main campaign to be interesting, but to some degree there's things that are necessary to move things along, versus the side quests, which are really supposed to be, I think, more like a treat, something to take you off into the wilderness to explore and do something that is not necessarily confined by the work that is the main quest to get that done.
I'm curious, now that you threw a question at me, if I can throw one back to you, on what are some of the elements that you include in side quests to keep them engaging and keep them feel like they're building up to a climax? Because for me, a side quest is like a short story or a flash fiction. It's like a smaller piece of the overall campaign where you still have to have that same momentum that builds up to a climax and a drop off in a feeling of a conclusion or a finiteness to it. Is there certain elements that you include, whether it's I know we've talked about hooks before, but a specific monster or specific goal, or when you're in the process of developing it, how do you I need to make sure I include all these things to make sure it feels complete as its own story?
So I like the comparison of a short story or flash fiction, and I feel like that's probably a good way of looking at it for anybody who engages in the writing aspect of writing. Flash fiction is really short, right? So that's more, I think, along the lines of what you were talking about earlier with the length of your side quest. It's something that's going to be very quick. You're going to get through that in less than a session most of the time. Short stories are of varying length. They can actually be quite long, and they could take quite some time to be completed. One of my favorite actual books that I grew up on was reading some of the Tales books from Dragonlance, where there were a variety of short stories in there. And some of those quests, some of those short stories were very long and involved. So when I look at doing this, I'm looking at one of those two things. I'm either looking at something that I want to be completed quickly, which means that I want the party to be able to engage with it and then resolve it within the same session. And if they're doing that, that helps to build momentum in the story, momentum as the characters for the players, so that they feel like they're doing something, and that helps to motivate them to keep them moving throughout the story. For the short stories, I'm more interested, or for the longer side quests, I'm more interested in trying to make sure that there is something that is occurring in those sessions that is appealing to the players. There's a reason they picked up the side quest to begin with, to do something, and I want to make sure that the things that I've learned about the characters in the game, those things are being part of the quest. And oftentimes, if we're talking about something like the side quest to get a piece of equipment, that's usually for one character. That doesn't mean that I can't include other things in that side quest that are not appealing to the other players and the other characters that are part of that group. Because traditionally, Bob wants to go seek out his belt of giant strength. The rest of the party is coming with him. I want to make sure that I'm including other stuff in that side quest where they're finding something that's interesting or intriguing to the specific characters that are in that group, so that they're also invested in that storyline beyond just basically tagging along because that's what we're doing this session.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I know that it's been a struggle sometimes for me, even as a DM, in creating the story, is that I'll have a character that wants to go visit with their mentors, or I'm thinking of even the Beckme campaign we did, where my character had to go off and defeat a god, or defeat this champion of the god. It was really just kind of for me, but the other characters had interest of doing the same thing for spaces that need to be investigated, things that need to be done in the forest, to bring them along with me, so it wasn't just like, all right guys, in this session you get to go watch Josh run off and kill a guy for 2 hours, and you guys can just right. kind of tail along or sit there quietly. It can be really challenging as a DM to meet those individual needs while also meeting party needs.
That's actually, I feel like a good example, and not to toot my own horn, but what happened, so you were going to defeat the champion of this god. We had another character who was playing an orc who was going to try and challenge a chief in order to take control of the tribe. And then we also had an elf character who was in the same group who ended up interacting with the elves who were native to that forest and ended up gaining an ally as a result of that. So I built those things into that region, even though ostensibly you guys were going there specifically for your Avenger to be able to accomplish his goal, his task that was presented to him by his god. Mm-hmm. The other characters that were in that group had opportunities to interact and engage with other things in that forest that allowed them to also engage with and enjoy that adventure as a whole, and they ended up with their own little quest that just happened to be in that same region.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the piece that I want to add with this, as we're probably getting close to wrapping up here, is as you're building side quests, make sure that you're putting in little morsels or crumbs along the way to keep the interest of all the people that are playing in your gaming sessions. They want to keep coming back and playing more.
With the caveat that if you're doing
if
you're doing a really short quest, you got that type of thing, don't draw out a quest longer than it needs to be simply to try and include everybody, because sometimes that can you slow down gameplay more than you want. It is really a balancing act of, if we're going to do a longer side quest, might as well bring everybody on board. If you're doing something that's very short and very succinct, get through it quickly so that everybody else can jump back into the game as quickly as possible.
Jon and Josh.